to this 2016 presidential debate. I'm your host, Anderson Cooper. The main issue we will be focused on today, voter fraud. Let's get into the candidates. The quote-unquote businessman, Donald J. Trump, and the slightly better option, the woman we all love to hate, Hillary Clinton. Let's start with a question for Mr. Trump. Do you feel voter fraud is a problem in U.S. elections, and if so, how would you stop it?
Believe me, there is a huge problem with voter fraud in this country. Every single day there are 11 million new instances of voter fraud in this country. Believe me, and we're quite frankly, Anderson, going to fix it.
Alright, I think you're thoroughly confused. Mrs. Clinton, same question.
Well, Anderson, my opponent is a liar. He simply cannot be trusted. There has never been a single case of voter fraud in this country.
Alright, I get it. Republicans think voter fraud is worse than the plague, and Democrats think it's non-existent. However, according to the American Economist, there have been elections in this country that very well could have been flipped due to voter fraud. Mr. Trump, how do you interpret this?
Well, I quite frankly am glad you mentioned this, Anderson. Every election in this country that crooked Hillary has won was only due to crookedness.
Right. Anyway, Mrs. Clinton, how do you interpret this?
Look, Anderson, even if there is some problem with voter fraud in this country, which I do recognize, it is not worth the adverse effects it has on voter turnout, particularly that of the minority vote.
So you were saying there was no voter fraud 2 minutes ago, but now you realize there is? Make up your mind, lady. Also, according to Sage Publications, there is a very minute effect on turnout from these laws, and there is no statistically significant evidence to suggest the reduction in turnout is based on racial or ethnic lines.
You said it best, Anderson. She's a nasty woman.
Right, that's what I said. Anyways, Mr. Trump, how do you plan to fight voter fraud?
By doing it.
And
Look, Anderson, no one has a brain the size of mine, alright? We have but one goal, make America great again and build the wall.
that's 2 goals, but anyways, Secretary Clinton, same question.
I plan to fight voter fraud with a comprehensive fight against our Russian adversaries who are increasingly meddling in our elections. It just is not right, unlike my opponent, who is Vladimir Putin's puppet.
Oh, I'm not the puppet, you're the puppet.
Please calm down, you're both making very little sense. Mr. Trump, how do you feel our elections are altered by fraud?
I would like to start by saying that factually it is my opponent who is a puppet. Look, Anderson, this is very simple and quite frankly obvious answer. If I win, there was no fraud. If I lose, then the fraud was bigly.
Yeah, right. Mrs. Clinton, do you have anything to add?
Well, Anderson, my opponent is a liar. He cannot be trusted. But I also think it is worth noting that Republican legislatures pass these sort of laws. It is clear that they are trying to suppress Democratic groups such as rural voters, the elderly, and minorities.
This again, I've already told you there's no suppression of the minority vote. Also, the elderly and rural voters tend to vote Republican. Why would Republicans want to suppress their own voters?
Well, I think there is a fundamental problem here that Donald Trump is cozying up to the Russians.
Okay, so you're just not going to answer this question. Mr. Trump, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond.
Crooked Hillary is the most nastiest, disastrous candidate, frankly, ever. I yield my time.
Right. Mrs. Clinton, in the presidential election of 2000, President George Bush won the state of Florida by roughly 500 votes. It was later proven that there were 5,600 people who voted who legally should not have. Do you think this cost your party's candidate, Vice President Gore, the election, or do you feel there was no issue of voter fraud in our country?
Well, Anderson, this has most certainly cost Gore the election. This was one of those cases where the court should have overturned the election results.
And Mr. Trump?
Anderson, this was a huge problem, okay? Believe me, this was the best thing that ever happened to our country. Al Gore is a lightweight, and he would have never been brave enough to build the wall.
Okay, so you're both just going to switch sides like that? All right, well, what would you do to implement as president to ensure something like this would not happen again? Mrs. Clinton?
Well, I would start by outlawing Russia. It is clear that they did this, and I, for one, am tired of Donald's xenophobic ways of targeting Mexicans. Look, they're voters too.
So you only care about Mexicans because they vote for you? Mr. Trump, same question.
What about Mexicans build the wall?
No, what would you do to stop what happened in 2000 from happening again?
I would build the wall.
Would someone please kill me? So, Mrs. Clinton would outlaw Russia, and Mr. Trump would build a wall. This is strange, since according to the American Economist, when laws make an action more difficult or prescribe a larger fine, the criminal offense is less often committed. So if we just pass voter identification laws and increase the punishments for those who vote illegally, then we would almost entirely solve the issue.
If you had a wall, then I agree.
Is it possible to cut his mic? No? Okay. In that case, Mrs. Clinton, are there any other reasons for why you oppose a voter ID law, although half the time you seem to support them?
Anderson, that is just one of the lies my opponent's been saying about me. I have never been in the support of strict voter ID laws. I have to stand against them due to the fact that most poor people vote for me, and they cannot afford to go buy a government-issued photo ID card.
What if I told you every state with a strict photo ID law provided its adult citizens with a free government-issued ID?
Yep, that is what my opponent would want you to say. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but he is a liar and cannot be trusted.
Mrs. Clinton, would you just please get out of your own way? Please. You're going to lose because you will not just give me a straight answer here. How can you lose to this guy?
Straight? Oh, Anderson, I support gay rights too, except for the last election where I opposed them.
Seriously? Please stop talking long enough for Mr. Trump to say something else dumber. Mr. Trump, do you think the passage of this type of law across the board would help or hinder your chances of being elected?
Well, Anderson, we can talk about that after the Mexicans pay for my wall.
What is this wall going to do exactly?
Show how great I am, obviously.
Right. Anyways, that's all the time we have, thank God. Good night, everyone. I assume you will not be voting for either candidate.